Hi, welcome to a kind of special edition of Out of the Blue. Today I'm going to be talking to you about Pluto, specifically about its reclassification, why that happened, why it's actually a really good thing, and why you need to stop complaining about it. Some of the things you already know about Pluto is that it was previously the 9th planet from the Sun, and it's kind of small compared to the rest of the planets, especially the ones way out there. What you may not know is that Pluto is actually super different from every other planet that's out there. For one, it's not made of gas like Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. It's made out of rock, which is kind of odd. Its orbit is also super off compared to the rest. Most of our planets orbit pretty circularly, but Pluto is like super weird. Another thing you may not know is that it was discovered by accident, and that's kind of important because at the time scientists didn't really have the tools or instruments to discover a planet as far as Pluto, especially as small as Pluto. Now, scientists totally accepted this accidental discovery because it was really cool, and even though it was going to change what they were going to teach, they accepted it because it was new knowledge and it was really important to accept that. Now, later on, pretty quickly later on, they actually got the tools and instruments to detect things that were trans-Neptunian, or farther than Neptune. Now, they discovered other things really quickly that rivaled Pluto in size. In fact, they discovered Eris, which is bigger than Pluto, and we never really learn about Eris because it's just not what was traditionally taught when we were little kids. But of course, it's more important that we focus on what we were taught as little kids than to actually focus on newer things that scientists have discovered since then, right? Right? No. Scientists started discovering trans-Neptunian objects as early as 1977, which is kind of long ago considering how recently Pluto was reclassified. Now, it was finally reclassified because scientists realized if they didn't reclassify it, they would have to add like 7 other planets to our current 8 planet list, and that's just not, that doesn't make sense, especially because the other planets all have different properties from the gas giants that are already there. So they decided instead to put Pluto in a new classification and define all the trans-Neptunian objects that they have found that are planet-sized as dwarf planets. Now, they use that name with a planet in it just to satisfy people like us that'll complain when we are faced with any sort of change. Now, I used to be really mad that Pluto was reclassified because, like a lot of you, I was like, no, I grew up with Pluto, poor baby, they demoted it, they changed it, they kicked it out of the solar system. They didn't, like, physically go out there and, like, flick Pluto out of the way. That's not how it happened. We just figured out newer things and we decided to change the current model. That's what science does. That's what science is supposed to do. We're supposed to be changing, we're supposed to be evolving, we're supposed to be advancing, and that's exactly what Pluto's reclassification was. It was an advancement in knowledge, and we need to start looking at it that way. You may be wondering why this is so important to me, and honestly it probably isn't that big of a deal to you, but I want to be an astronomer someday. And I think it's really important that we kind of accept that astronomy is changing, that science as we know it is changing every day. Now, that's what it's supposed to be doing. If it didn't change, it wouldn't be science. And I want you guys to remember things like the geocentric orbit, where we used to think that everything revolved around the Earth, and when they changed that, there was a huge deal, right? And there was a huge deal because people thought that the Earth was special in some way, right? They had like a reason to be against that change. We don't have much reason to be against Pluto changing. The only reason we have is that it's not what we learned. And really, when you think about it, that's not the best reason. I mean, if we were against everything changing based on what we learned in grade school, then we wouldn't learn anything past grade school. We wouldn't change any misconceptions that we had in grade school. And if you discourage change by complaining about it all the time, scientists are going to have a hard time changing. They've wanted to change Pluto since 1977, but it's such a thing that we resist change that they couldn't do it. So stop complaining about change in science because it's going to happen and it needs to happen. On that note, I know a lot of you aren't actually like religiously, vehemently against the changing of Pluto, and maybe you just kind of like to argue about it because it's fun. And that's totally acceptable as long as you know in your heart and soul that it's okay for science to change. It's okay to not be a cool kid and say that it's okay for Pluto to change. On that note, I want you to continue loving science and continue loving change in science every day, and I will see you next week.